great, wonderful.
Is there any way of communicating with your online student
That we're back on?
We're back on?
Yeah, I'll see if I can. It's, okay, we're up and running. If not, I'll send him the video of what we explained that something happened that I don't know anything about, and our IT intervention team came back and did something.
Sometimes it's just a matter of turning it off and turning it on again.
Yeah, it worked fine in the period before, but it just decided not to.
Well, let me know if you have any other problems.
I will, or someone else will. Someone will, I'm sure. He is such a helpful person, I must admit. We are unbelievably blessed with technical staff. That's almost beyond, it's almost unbelievable. Anyway, so Parliament used this principle of virtual representation to justify it. And what the British could not understand is they could not, the idea that you would not like this law, that you would protest this law, that you would write letters saying the law is awful, but to attack it with violence, that was inconceivable. The British could not figure out why you would do that. Who would do that? British people don't do that. Well, these people were no longer really British. They were becoming Americans. They lived on the opposite side of the ocean. They did not feel as connected to the mother country, and England didn't realize that. Speeches in the House of Burgesses by people like Patrick Henry stirred up the crowd. You know, give me liberty or give me death. Man. The Stamp Act Congress was called and affirmed that the colonies would be loyal to the empire, but rejected the idea of virtual representation. If the British had granted each colony a representative in Parliament, they could have stopped the revolution right here. If they would have just said, I mean, and how would that have changed the balance of power, having 13 representatives in Parliament? You might even have had some of the smaller colonies go together and elect one to represent a group. They might have even been happy if they had one representative for the entire 13 colonies together. But this could have stopped the revolution right then and there. Ireland, oh, by the way, Ireland was not represented in Congress, in Parliament at this time. They were treated exactly the same way as the Americans. So the English could not figure out what the big deal was with the Americans. Parliament eventually will repeal the Stamp Act, but reasserted British authority by passing a different act called the Declaratory Act that insisted they had the right to do this again if they wanted. So they repealed the Stamp Act, but they passed another law on top of it saying, if we want to do it again, we can. We're just doing away with this because we want to. And then they passed the Townshend Acts, and these were a series of acts proposed by the Prime Minister, Lord Townshend, that taxed other products that the Americans wanted to buy. Lead, glass, paint, and tea for the sole purpose of raising revenue. And which one was the real bad one, which really made the Americans mad? Tea, yeah. No one ever heard of throwing tea into Boston Harbor. It kind of sinks. So you wouldn't do any good with doing that. But and this taxation was controlled by a board of commissioners that was determined to get the tax. Now, this man, John Hancock, who is famous for writing his name very large on the Declaration of Independence, was one of the wealthiest men in the colonies. And he was charged with smuggling in 1768. Now, he had been a merchant importing products, but when all of this came into play, that bit into his business, having to send part of the revenue back to England as taxes. So he would just smuggle the things in past the tax man and continue to sell the products at the regular price. He was tried by a British court. The charges were eventually dropped, but it caused colonial defiance. Then the British do something else, which they probably, all of these things the British do, I think they were just, they didn't understand what was going on in America, they didn't care. And they kept doing things that made the Americans mad. And they couldn't understand why the Americans were mad, and so they just decided to try and force the Americans to obey. Well, you just cannot force Americans to obey. That's not the way it works. And it just made it worse and worse and worse. This act of 1774, the Quebec Act, really set things off in the Americans. Now, the British were having trouble up in Quebec. Quebec used to be this little area up here around the St. Lawrence River. And is anyone aware of the characteristics of the people who live there? If you go to Quebec today, what might be two things that you might know about people from Quebec? What nationality are they?
French.
They're French. And religion, they're likely to be Catholic. So they're French Catholics. And both of those things made the Protestants down here uneasy. There were some Catholics in the colonies, but not very many. So what the British decided to do in order to prevent there be a French rebellion in French-speaking Quebec, they decided to make Quebec bigger. So they expanded Quebec from this territory to all of the land of modern Quebec, and for the most part, Ontario, and the states of Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, all the way down to the Ohio River, west to the Mississippi River. This scared the Protestants. They saw this as Catholic intrusion, and they wanted that land. The Americans wanted that land. Now they're giving it to the Catholics, the French. And right on top of that, there was a great fear that the Church of England would become more powerful and force its will over the rest of the colonies. So that you would either have to be Anglican or Catholic. No more Lutherans, Congregational, or whatever else types of religion there happen to be, Presbyterian in the United States. And then, there was a massacre. Now this does begin sort of because of uprisings. The Boston Massacre is the result of aroused people. A crowd began pelting regimental guards with snowballs and rubbish. Snowballs and rubbish. And if you throw snowballs and rubbish at a bunch of regimentals with guns, guess what might happen to you? You might get shot. Do not throw snowballs or rubbish at men with guns. Please do not do that. That is not smart. The soldiers reacted by firing into the crowd. And 5 citizens of Boston, including an African American named Crispus Attucks, was killed. And many people believe that these are the 5 first fatalities of the Revolutionary War. Samuel Adams and the Sons of Liberty are in creating the incident that will make this happen. There is evidence that the men who marched on the British soldiers and pelted them with snowballs, oyster shells, rubbish, had also ordered them to fire or asked them to shoot at them. Shoot at us, attack us. And the order to fire came not from the commander, but from the crowd. And someone may have fallen, or the gun went off by mistake, and then the rest of the men just started shooting. Once one started shooting, everyone else started shooting. This is an etching that was made by Paul Revere that does show a whole bunch of fatalities, probably more than 5, trying to use this to inflame the society. But one of the things that I find to be most intriguing is that who was the defense attorney for the soldiers who were attacked and then fired into the crowd? But none other than the first Vice President of the United States, second President, John Adams. John Adams will come to their defense and successfully get them acquitted in a colonial court that was stacked against them on the basis that this was not a legal assembly, but a mob that was intent on violence towards them, and men who are being attacked are not to stand around like stoic philosophers lost in apathy, but when they are attacked can defend themselves. And that's exactly what they did. And they did not do anything wrong when they did so. It's a terrible thing that some people were killed, but he defended the British soldiers against the charge of murder and got them acquitted. But in response to this, the British punished Boston. And added a new tax called the tax on tea. All of the other taxes were dropped on lead, glass, whatever else, but they kept the tax on tea because the West India Company had a monopoly on the tea business and they were losing money. So what the British did was say that you can have the exclusive right to the American market. You can sell tea in America, but we'll put a tax on it. But because tea is so cheap, we can add a tax on it and it'll still be cheaper than it was before the tax was put on, because you are selling cheap tea at such a cheap rate. And this is what set the Americans off. They realized that it was a principle here. Even though the tea is cheaper, there is tax on that tea. And so, a group of American patriots dressed up like Indians in disguise, kind of weird, dressed up like Indians, left the Green Dragon Tavern, which is still in business in Boston. You can go there, get a sandwich. You only want a sandwich there. They sell other things that we would not partake of. But you can still get a sandwich there. And they met upstairs and they went over and they dressed up as Indians and they went across the harbor and they tossed tea overboard, about 300 cases of tea into Boston Harbor. They broke one lock, replaced it, and then afterward, they didn't think much of it. The British went through the roof. As a result, they passed what became known as the Intolerable Acts. Boston Port Bill closed the port of Boston. No more trade in or out of Boston. Americans would be taken to Canada for trial instead of tried in their own courts because they felt that the colonial courts were biased against them. Troops would be quartered in Boston in people's homes, and that's why one of the amendments to the Constitution is that soldiers cannot be quartered in your home without fair compensation. So if they come in and they say, we need your spare bedroom to house the army, they have to pay you for that. They might still be able to force you to take them, but you will be paid. And expanded the power of the governor in these states in order to exert authority over them.
Rocking our Romans mission and a splashing over the horizon. What can it be? The pilgrims sailed the sea to find a place to call their own. In their ship they flower, they hope to find a better home. They finally knocked on Plymouth Rock, and someone said, we're there. It may not look like home, but at this point I don't care. Oh, they were missing Mother England. They swore their loyalty until the very end. Anything you say, King, it's okay, King. You know it's kinda scary on your own. Gonna build a new land the way we planned. Would you help us run it till it's grown? They planted corn, you know, they built their houses one by one. And bit by bit they worked until the colonies were done. They looked around, yeah, up and down, and someone said, hooray! If the king could only see us now, he would be proud of us today. They knew that now they'd run their own land. But George III still vowed he'd rule them to the end. Anything I say, do it my way now. Anything I say, do it my way. Don't you get to feeling independent, 'cause I'm gonna force you to obey. He taxed their property, he didn't give them any choice. And back in England, he didn't give them any voice. That's called taxation without representation, and it's not fair. But when the colonies complained, the king said, I don't care. He even has the nerve to tax our cup of tea. To put it kindly, King, we really don't agree. Gonna show you how we feel. We're gonna dump this tea and turn this harbor into the biggest cup of tea in history. They wanted no more Mother England. They knew the time had come for them to take command. It's very clear you're being unbacking. No matter what you say, we won't obey. Gonna hold a revolution now, King, and we're gonna run it all away with no more king.
We're gonna elect a president.
No more king.
He's gonna do what the people want.
No more king.
We're gonna run things our way.
No more king.
Nobody's gonna tell us what to do.
Rocking our rolling position and splashing over the horizon. What can it be?
one second here. There is, so this is where that took place in Boston. And as a result of that, there is a new movement to create change. Now here, England figured that if they are hard on Boston, the rest of the colonies would say, oh, don't want to do that. You know, somebody you can do that. You can punish one child and hope that the other child will straighten out. You know how that works? You can do that. A college can sometimes do that. You know, you can make an example of someone. You know, we're going to be mean to this student, and everyone else will wise up. That doesn't always work very well, and it didn't work well here because sometimes the rest of the children or students, or in this case colonies, will say, they can do it to Boston, they can do it to us. Let's stand with Boston. Let's get together. Let's unify. Let's identify with them. And so in September of 1774, they decide to meet in Philadelphia in Carpenter's Hall, which you can still visit. And they intended to isolate Massachusetts, but they united the colonies with Massachusetts. Jefferson will write a summary view of the rights of British Americans that laid out what their demands were and what they expected in return for being British here in America. And if that wasn't going to be respected, then maybe they wouldn't want to be British Americans, but Americans who used to be British. Massachusetts called for Congress to meet in Philadelphia. You almost had to sneak there because movement of travel and so forth. This Carpenter's Hall is very similar to what we think of today as the Masons, but they're carpenters instead. It's a fraternal order that you can still join if you're an engineer or something of that nature. And this was their meeting hall that you could rent. It was the Carpenter Hall. It's called Carpenter Hall. They met there the First Continental Congress. And while they were there, in September, it included representatives from all 12 colonies. Delaware at this point is still part of Pennsylvania, so they are not 13 yet. Forcible denial of rights in one place threatened the rights of all of the colonists. They made a non-importation agreement of British goods, which everyone knew no one would enforce, but it sounded good on paper. And it authorized each colony to organize a militia. Peyton Randolph from Virginia was elected the first president of the First Continental Congress. So you might want to say that he was the first president of the United States. Not exactly, but he was president of the First Continental Congress. If you go there, you can go in the room. Well, actually, the room is now expanded. They've taken a wall down. And if you go there and you look at where the wall used to be, and you know, those men were kind of cozy in there having their meeting. It's not a very large room now when you're standing in there, and you realize there used to be a wall down the middle and only part of it was used for this meeting. Anyway, but it's open to the public and you can visit it there, and definitely worth seeing in the historic area of Philadelphia. So we're almost done. And I am taking a look here. We need to organize these much better. But, okay, we're done for today, and we'll see you next week, Monday, back at the regular time. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. E. Good afternoon.
Here's the picture of me when I was on the boat in Boston Harbor, when I was,
That's cool.
there we are on the boat, that's my mom and my sister.
Is it
It's
a
not the-
replica?
It's a
of
replica, the
one?
actual boat is in London if you want to visit it. I don't know if David.
Yes, that's where David Indiana is for you.
Yes, but I don't know if they were on the actual boat that was, the T was thrown off of, but you can visit it there.
Huh,
It's, there's the boat. That's the actual spot where it was docked.
cool.
That's me at Concord this is the memorial to the British soldiers who were killed in the battle over this bridge at the Battle of Concord. Yeah, the grave of the British soldiers who were killed in the battle. That's in Lexington. But anyway, yeah,
Have a good afternoon.
yes, you too.